challenges we experience at 10,000 acres are the same things we see at 1,000 acres, the same thing my grandma sees at her garden over in Choctaw. So it's not any different. We're all seeing the same things. We might grow a little bit different, but things are very similar. Talk about where we're going today. I am going to talk more about production agriculture, large-scale row crop production. Once again, it's what I work in. If I were to talk about vegetables, you guys probably kick me out of the room about halfway through because I just don't know what I'm talking about on that. So we'll talk a lot about row crops. We have a lot of cover crops going into row crops. As an organic, that is a growing field as we speak, is looking at some of our large-scale production ags and organic. It's difficult. And we'll talk about some of the challenges specifically when we talk about row crop. However, because of time, we're going to have to kind of take that 10,000-foot view of things. We can't talk about specifics on things. We will look at some specific challenges that exist, specifically for producers in the large-scale production, but we will more take a glossing over look at cover crops and all that into these large-scale productions. And then what I'm going to end on is something that is near and dear to my heart. It's using cover crops as a weed management tool in our large-scale production ag systems. Once again, we talked about that already in horticulture, so it's one of those that could be easily, compatible with the veg production is the same thing we're doing in the wheat, soybean, and corn systems as well. So when we talk about cover crops, it's been a hot topic as of late. In my professional society, we've actually had a whole section of the society developed in the last 5 years talking about cover crops. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people from various walks in the science talk about it. However, it's a very historic practice. This is not anything new that we're doing. Some of the things that we have these aha moments that I've seen a lot of you guys have today of saying, I've seen that. We knew that 60 years ago, we just forgot it. A lot of this stuff we've known, we've tried out, we've found. And easy, you can see this is some of the area in northern Africa using cover crops in their cotton system. Okay, it's been around for a long time. Even in production agriculture, it is. When we talk about more modern day cover crops, we see a lot more use and a lot heavier reliance in those small scale production systems because they are a little easier to manage as far as if something goes wrong, 1,000 acres is a lot easier to do and whoopsie-daisy to than it is 10,000 acres. So it is a little bit easier to kind of manipulate and manage, as well as the specialty crops, and we'll talk a lot more about that, is because the cost-benefit analysis of that. When I get a lot more on the back end, I can try a lot more crazy things if I know that I'm going to be able to, a couple pounds extra at the end of the year is going to pay me out pretty good. So, however, what we've seen is great gains in production agriculture in the last 5 going on 10 years as far as using these cover crops. And most of it has been with this big soil health movement. Okay, so when we started bringing into this soil health and what is soil health and looking underneath the ground, not just at the crops, we started seeing a lot more come that in. But we have to ask ourselves at the beginning, why do we use cover crops? Once again, it's things we can learn together with each other. Is the benefits that AJ talked about is the same thing you see in a soybean production field as you do in a cucumber patch, right? The same thing happens. Benefits, once again, I'll talk about soil health first because that's kind of where a bulk majority of the big publication or the big press lies. However, I think some of this stuff down here actually is where we need to be focusing specifically on the ground level. We can let the New York Times run things on soil health, but as a on-the-field growing system, we need to also look at some of these other things. Talked a lot about nutrient cycling, water dynamics. We see here, this is a picture from Steve Groff. He's one of the big cover crop users up in the Northeast. Got a great picture where he had a small grain cover crop versus conventionally tilled, and they were going into some field PE production there. Great water infiltration associated with those cover crops. We know in Oklahoma when we get those big 4-inch, what my grandma always used to call toad chokers, right? 4-inch an hour rains to where those are really coming in. We need a lot of that to go in. It's great to say we got 4 inches, we're recharging the profile. If 70% of it winds up in the ditch. I don't know what profile we're recharging, okay? So we have to make sure that the water that we get are actually going into the ditch. We'll talk a lot more about it when we talk about the IPM strategy, specifically with weed control a little bit later. Other benefits that we're starting to get, ecological service. I work a lot in canola, and with canola we worry all the time about pollinators and making sure that we bring pollinators early. That way in that canola crop that we're actually having. So we can have those field border buckwheat patches, wildflower patches, those kind of things. Those are really big that we're starting to talk about. And then we also talk about biodiversity. I had a great thing the other day that said, you know, we always bash on corn and soybean production. You know the most ecologically undiverse system in the United States right now? Anybody? No. Lynn, go outside. Your front lawn. It is basically barren, okay? So we're trying to look at that biodiversity aspect when we look at some of the other things, but I often say one of the biggest things that we forget that cover crops do is in the name, and it's cover, okay? They're basically used in great source of cover, okay? So I have a question. Soil, is it a renewable or non-renewable resource? So it's renewable. How many people think it's renewable? There you go. Depends on how long you're going to be alive in this world, because I personally don't plan on being here for 500 years, okay? Soil overall is considered a non-renewable resource because it takes about 500 years for us to develop an inch of soil. It takes us 30 minutes to lose it. So when we talk about cover, you see the grandiose nature of that. When we talk 500 for an inch, that's probably on the upper end of that scale, but being in Oklahoma, as dry as it is and as stable as some of our bedrock is, you're not far off that 500 in Oklahoma, as opposed to, I spent a lot of my time previously in Louisiana. I feel like I can watch the soil form down there, okay? This is not the case. We need that. Over the last 150 to 200 years, it's been estimated across the Great Plains, all the way from Texas up through Canada, we've lost about 15 inches of soil. So in about half the time it takes an inch, we've done 15 inches worth of damage to it, okay? So when we talk about soil health, we're talking about regenerating, rebuilding that soil. Anybody taken a business class before when they were in school? Is it harder to get a new client or to keep an existing client? It's almost 15 times harder to get a new client to buy your goods than to keep the ones you already have satisfied. Same concept can be added to soil. It's much easier to do the things right, to keep that soil in place, than it is to talk about how much organic matter we can build and how much biodiversity we can add. We had it, we lost it. Okay, this is not crop production, this is us in the entire world. We've lost a lot of it. So focusing a lot more on that cover, I think, is going to be one of the biggest things. As far as production agriculture, we've seen a stagnation in wheat over the last about 30 years. We have not increased in the southern Great Plains a bushel in the last 30 years. Okay? We've gotten a lot more fertilizer. We've gotten a lot more advanced in our techniques. We've gotten a lot more advanced in our genetics. You know what's the difference? We've kept on losing some of that soil. And now we're working mainly on subsoil. Okay? Subsoil is the most or the least productive soil we typically have in a profile, right? We've lost the most productive. Okay? So gaining it back is great. All this soil health practices, if we lose it again, it's all for naught. We basically taken a step forward and taken about 5 or 6 backwards. Okay? So once again, when you look about cover crops, remember right in the name is cover, and that's what we have to make sure we're really focusing on. So when we talk about the benefits, there's challenges associated as well. There's never going to be just positives. There's always positives with either challenges you have to overcome or drawbacks you have to accept. Okay? As far as production agriculture, cost of application is number one. We talked about cost a little bit earlier. Whenever you're cover cropping 1,000 acres and you're having to spend $20,000 on something, things get a little steep, okay? Bankers don't like to see $20,000 going out for a cover crop, okay? And my growers focus a lot on what their banker says because they got to work on those loan systems. The other thing that goes hand in hand is return on investment. It's great if I spend it, but if I don't get it back, it doesn't really matter. And we can talk all day long about the other secondary benefits of soil health and microbial communities and water infiltration. Once again, production agriculture is run from a bank, not in the field. That's a misconception, isn't it? The bank runs a lot of things that happen in the field. Okay? So when we look at just a $10 brown bag special is what we like to call it. Bin run wheat, something like that, to where growers go out and put in bin run wheat across their field. You're looking at maybe they got a field that's 70 acres, so you're about $700 plus about $120 application fee, custom applicators, custom planters, maybe you have to work the field. So you get add about $120 across 70 acres to that. So you're looking at $820 over 70 acres. You divide that, so you're looking at about $12 an acre. Okay? I have to return to break even. So what does that look like for corn? About 4 bushel. So we're looking at you have to get a 5 to 10% yield increase for me to even just pay back what I spent. How many people would do what they're doing if you're just paying back what you spent? Those are the people I like to say that get city jobs. Those are the people that don't stay in the farming very long, okay? We have to be making a profit. We have to be going over. So you're probably going around that 5 to get more of, you need that 15 to 20% over on a return on investment for things to happen. And that's not even taking into account time and labor. We talk to growers all the time about how much is your time worth. How much is your time worth? If you don't have a secondary job, it's very hard to quantify how much doing something for 3 hours is worth because that's just what I do, right? And so that's not even taking into account what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, okay? One of the other big drawbacks or challenges we have in production agriculture is lack of knowledge. And we'll talk a little bit about that, is covers becoming weeds. What's a weed? Anything that does not belong or is not desired, okay? A weed in my cornfield, when we go and Gail goes out, might be a great source in a rangeland system, okay? A corn plant in her system might be, detrimental, might be a weed. So in each individual system, they can become a weed. When a cover is in a cover crop system, it's a cover. Whenever it's in my soybean field, that's a weed. Okay? Because it's competing with light, nutrients, resources with my cash crop. Okay? And then how to plant into residue. We've worked 30 years trying to get no-till going. And you guys have seen pictures this morning. This is not your average no-till system. The residue that we typically plant into is much greater. And so actually getting good production across 10,000 acres, good planting, is a big challenge that we have yet to overcome still yet today. Okay? The other thing is, and I draw a big red dot around this, is poor marketing. Now I say that is that the cover crop sales folks have done a great job marketing. The unfortunate thing is they've oversold and underproduced. You never want to do that. You always want to undersell and overproduce, right? You always want to do more than you say you're going to do, okay? This is a big thing, okay? Who here watches late night television? Yeah, of course you do. I got a 4-month-old daughter. I'm up at 2 or 3 o'clock watching infomercials all the time, okay? We've all seen the crock pot commercials that can, steam some carrots, cook your beef brisket. It'll throw itself in the wash. It'll clean your oven while you're asleep. It'll do everything. I won't say that I haven't bought one of those before. Unfortunately, when cover crops came out, that's what it was going to do. It was going to add carbon to your soil, improve your microbial activity, add nitrogen to your soil, make water infiltrate better, make better nematodes. It can't do everything. They're plants. They're the plants we've been using for years. Okay? So we've overpromised and we've drastically underdelivered. And what that's done is it's left a very foul taste in a lot of producers' mouth. And we'll talk about how long we have row crop producers to do new practices here in a little bit, but it's not long. Okay? So we actually have an NRCS CIG grant, and we've gone out, and the basis of that grant is to go to ag producers and say, what limitations are you seeing for cover crop integration? Why aren't you doing it? Or if you are doing it, why do you continue to do it? And so this is our answer. So we got percent of responses. Our responses, they could respond to more than one at a time. And this is not all of them. This is just the top 5 that we actually have. So the question was to do a soil health system, which that's what cover crops is considered now. It's not a conservation system, it's a soil health system. For you to add or adopt or try a practice, what would it have to do? Almost 20%, a little over 20% said I have to get a monetary return on investment. I have to. Once again, the banker owns my farm. Okay, so I need to keep him happy. I need to see decreased erosion. When we talk about erosion, who here's from northern tier of Oklahoma, like north of Enid? Who here's driven in North Enid in March? I bless your heart, because I don't know how I see anymore driving up in North Oklahoma. When to say the wind blows, and it's not what's the wind's blowing, it's what's in the wind, that's really big. The amount of wind erosion we get up in that northern tier, southern Kansas, is excessive. We'll talk a little bit of why that is. Stability from environmental stresses. So drought stress, over moisture, flood stress, those kind of things, that's what we're talking about. Improved soil organic carbon and organic matter. Lowered nutrient additions. Like I want to be less reliant on what I typically put into my system. Maybe I want to cut my fertility in half. Maybe I don't want to make herbicide applications. Shockingly enough, a lot of people come to me and say, you work with conventional agriculture, why don't you go organic? A lot of our growers don't want to put out herbicides. It's a have to. They have to. They're locked into it. So they'd love to be in a system where they're less reliant on Monsanto and Bayer and all that, but they can't. So this is growers that are actively doing cover crops. What benefits have you seen? Decreased erosion. Remember, I think that was number 2 on what they need to have. Increased water infiltration. I do believe that was number 4. Suppression of weeds wasn't on there, but it's one that people see all the time. Increased microbial activity, sure, sorry, Gail, close your ears. Increased soil organic matter, okay. I'll talk about, no, I won't talk about it. Josh will talk about it. I'm going to hold my tongue on that one. Increased plant available nitrogen, absolutely, okay. So we see that, it's great. Things are happening there that we really want to happen. So what are the challenges integrating cover crops into a production ag system, right? 1, selection is your most important thing that you're going to do. When you're looking at that seed catalog book, that is the most important decision you're going to make from a cover crop standpoint at any given point of the year. 1, it determines the realistic potential benefits. Once again, I'll highlight that, realistic potential benefits. What limitations might arise? Me personally, I like to choose single species. I like to have a single species out there. When something goes wrong, it's easy for me to pull the trigger and manage it and get things to go right? Easy to manage. It does provide you limitations, but you need to be focused on a couple of benefits. When I have growers come up and say, I want a cover crop. Great, what do you want out of cover crops? I want these 10 things. Probably can't do 10 things in 1 year. Why don't we pick 2 or 3 that are the big, most important things that you think need to happen? Because others might arise just by you doing the other things right, but you need to be realistic with your benefits. Mixes, potentially overcome these challenges, but it greatly depends on how they interact. And I'll show an example of this, right? So we get this all the time. I want to increase nitrogen for my successive cash crop, maybe become less reliant on fertilizer, right? We get that all the time. That's a big thing. Most of the organic producers that I talk to, this is their big thing. I want to have a legume out there so I don't have to spread manure across 1,000 acres. Awesome. Okay, we can do that. I also want cover. Awesome. Cover's a good thing. So when we look at those, clovers are typically one of your bigger ones for nutrient additions. They're very easy to control. They are a little costly, but I can control them fairly easy. Getting a good mower over them, doing something like that, it's going to control. Small grain is typically the easiest thing we can get for cover because, one, I can get it for $10 an acre, and two, there's a lot of it, and three, once again, if things go wrong, I can help you fix things going wrong, okay? What's the problem with this? Who here knows about C/N ratios? Okay? When do we need to make sure that we're not terminating our clovers to make sure we're at peak nitrogen addition to the soil? So right before bloom is when you activate all of them. You typically will want desiccation of flower to make sure that you're contributing the peak amount of nitrogen. So for our crimson clover in the state, that's typically March or April. What does a rye look like in April? It's about this big, okay? So when we talk about C/N ratios, when we talk about rye that's about this big that's starting heading out, C/N ratio, that's about 80-1. Okay? We're not getting that much nitrogen to it. So if termination of that cover is delayed to ensure adequate nitrogen is produced by the clover, C/N ratio of the small grain is high enough that you'll probably immobilize a bulk majority of the nitrogen that's released that given year. So you don't get the nitrogen, you got the cover. It's a good cover. If you terminate it early, you probably won't get the cover because rye is at about this stage. Rye is very nutrient rich, so those microbials break it down really fast. So you won't get cover, okay? So there's a back and forth with that. Okay, so bad plan. Let's do something else, right? Still got my nitrogen, good cover with radishes. If you guys have ever seen tillage radish, purple top turnips, canola, various things like that, great cover, right? Great cover. The only downfall you have with that is that those will winter kill, with the exception of canola. Most of our purple top turnips, the daikon radishes, those kind of things will typically winter kill. If not, the deer will get them before they make it to spring. Okay? So therefore, now I have to rely on my clover for my residue, for my cover. If you time it right, that's possible. It's a good thing. You're going to get a ton of nitrogen for that successive crop at this point in time, right? So selection's the key. The easy way out is not the right way. The rye clover probably wasn't going to get you either of what you wanted. But doing something like a clover and a radish probably gets you not 100% of both aspects that you wanted, but probably gets you as close to both of them as you possibly can get. Okay? So there is potential there, but selection is key. It's not only about the benefits. The problem with selecting things we don't know is that we don't know them. Okay? The great forage of the South. Who knows that one? What's that? Best forage. Kudzu. The best windbreak to ever hit the southern Great Plains. Eastern red cedar. Okay? We didn't know them, and so we didn't know what to do. Some of the most dominant cover crops that we use across the United States, perennial and annual ryegrass. It's the hardest weed to get out of our wheat systems. Okay? So it's a challenge. Unfortunately, this is not discussed. We don't tell growers the downfall of this. And once again, that's part of that overselling and under-delivering is when you don't tell them things can go wrong is when things go wrong. Okay, we have to make sure. Our growers are smart. We can't hide things from them. Okay, it's going to find out. When they get it in the field, they'll find out. Termination, one of the most challenging aspects once you actually get the cover in the field. Termination can occur several different ways. Naturally, we talked about winter kill when we talked about various things. Chemically, that's where a bulk majority of the production ag kind of comes in. But we can also do physically, and this one's actually growing, those roller crimpers, mowing, various things like that, as long as the crop is terminated. Okay? This is a big discussion point here. Is there such thing as a green bridge? Who here knows what a green bridge is? Bradley, I'm glad to see. We've talked about this before, Bradley. So undoubtedly, yes. So basically what it is a lot of our pests, diseases, insects that occur really early in the season, they just want food. Okay? Armyworms are a great example. They love cover crops. Okay? So if we have a big smattering of armyworms when we plant our crop, that's where we kind of run into trouble. So the pro cover croppers in the world will say that planting green helps build up beneficials. Yes. I mean, to a degree, yes. I mean, that's right. It doesn't allow the pest to become an issue, and it provides an alternate food source for that pest. All those are correct to a degree. Okay? There's some limitations to that. What does the data actually say? Planting green is a challenge. High incident of cutworm, armyworm, seedling, and seed rots are a big thing. When we talk about high density vegetation, so your cereals and your summer grasses, this is where you'll see the bulk majority of that. Unfortunately, this is kind of the crux of where most of our cover crops lays in. Cereal or sorghum, sudan, millet as your base to add things into, that's where things become an issue. So a big issue in our corn, sorghum, and canola. Less of an issue in soybean and cotton. We don't really get armyworm issues in canola or soybean and cotton as much as other ones. I took a picture here. You can't see it because of the light, but we have all of our sorghum variety trials get planted into covers. We do that for a moisture standpoint. The unfortunate thing is we lost 2 trials this year because of the amount of armyworms we had. We plant treated seed and we spray a pyrethroid as soon as we plant, but it did not matter. Okay? So we lost to them because of how much armyworm were in there. So this is a little bit of data that we have. Corn planted into covers. So if we burn down the cover chemically, planted green with no seed treatment, no foliar treatment, planted green with a seed treatment, and planted green with a foliar insecticide treatment. Basically, the best we could do is add that seed treatment in. Planting green is just serving out a buffet. Okay, you're giving them a continuous arc of green vegetation to eat on. I'm gonna have to hurry through these, but we'll get through it. The one big thing that I will say is that if you ever plant into cover crops, you will see drastically decreased amount of slugs. That is a big thing in non-wet years. Okay? I added that in the end, just so. There is data to support that some of our cover crops, specifically some of our brassicas, limit the amount of slugs that come in. Slugs usually aren't a big issue for me, but whenever we talk and we go into some of our summer and spring cover crops, that is a big issue. They can help. It's highly variable. A lot of things have to go right for that to be the big thing. So we'll go back to this. Monetary return on investment was our number one. This is a graph we've seen before. So we asked the question again is, okay, so if you don't make money on this system, how long are you willing to try it? About 2 years. So the whole thing, it'll work in 5 years. Can't do that for row crop producers. Can't do that. Okay, we have to have it a little earlier because then the unlikely to implement goes up greatly, where we have almost 80% by the time 5 years is up, where they're not even going to try it again. And when asked, will they go and redo it when more information is learned, most of them say no. So the greatest benefit is weeds. Resistant weeds are one of the biggest issues we have in row crop production agriculture now. Certain weeds are becoming harder to control, or they're just too costly to control now. We talked a little bit about ryegrass. If you've ever heard of kochia, kochia is basically one thing that will roam free now because the amount of chemical I have to put on it to kill it, it's not worth it. I'll just till it the next time my thing goes fallow because that's basically all I have. Okay? With traditional means, basically some of these things have become uncontrollable. With quality IPM, prevention, monitoring, and management. Those are your 3 pillars of a good IPM program. Using cover crops, what do you think that is? Because there's a difference between control and suppression. Cover crops will suppress weeds. They will not, without allelopathy, control weeds ever. They do not kill weeds. Can't do it, okay? Control usually means eradication. Dead, nothing there. More, you're talking about herbicides and tillage are where you get these through. Suppression means you're decreasing performance of that weed, decreasing the competition that weed has with the thing I have an option. Rarely kills it. This is where you're talking more cover crops and mulching, is suppression. Okay? That's fine, because what you're doing is I can control them in the off season. I need to just make sure they're not harming my yield right now. So how much potential do we have? So this is one that I want to highlight because for an organic, we sprayed no herbicide out here. I can do that, and I like to do that for my cover crop stuff because I want to see the true potential, but I have to work with the growers that I'm working with, right? If they want herbicides, then I have to do it at some point in time because we always have a check, okay? So what we're looking at is the soybean field up in Nowata County. So South Coffeyville, way up in the Northeast District. We look at all of our cover crops. This is a rye radish pea, a radish pea. This mix is, we just took everything that we had left over and dumped it into the planter and just said go. We didn't want to carry any seed back. We didn't have any room, okay? So when we look at this rye at burn down, so this is when that grower came in and terminated the covers. So what we're looking here is, are covers a weed at this point? No, because it's what I want. So this is everything that isn't one of the covers that I planted. Rye had drastically the least. So we're talking about 14 per about, I think this was a 10 square foot ring around there. So we're looking at 14 weeds total. As we progress 1 month, everything did really well. However, 1 month, this is when we transition from winter weeds to summer weeds. So we rarely have weeds out there 1 month after termination. So this is right at planting. 2 months, here's your check. So compare everything to the check. Kitchen sink, which was, what, a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-way mix, had the closest thing to the check. Why? Because we didn't really have a lot of anything out there. It's just a whole lot of little bits and pieces. Okay? And as we go later in the season, this is right at termination of the crop. We're looking, our rye is still at 26 weeds per 10 square feet. I can deal with that. I typically can't get that kind of control with herbicides. So I can deal with that. When we look at things with the radish, because of the winter kill, the kitchen sink, because of the winter kill and everything there, and the rye radish pea, we really just aren't getting anything. Okay? Good weed control happens with good cover. Once again, you're just trying to choke out those weeds to where we just don't provide a good growing environment for them. This is one to where the soybean grower wanted herbicide, but I convinced him to do with and without. Okay? Basically, what I want to highlight here, this is 2 square foot, very weedy section of northeast Oklahoma. When we look at anything without in a very high pressure scenario, it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. This is big water hemp territory. And water hemp is a pickle to deal with, okay? We got really good with rye pea and radish. That's about as good as we did. When we paired it with one in-season herbicide application, we basically wiped everything out, okay? So those growers aren't removing herbicide, but where that grower typically made 3, we made 1, okay? We're moving in the right direction, right? Okay, we're getting there. Once again, this is soybean yield, and this is, I broke it out. This is the same as this one, except I broke it out into types of weeds. Basically, what we have is we have the biggest issue with our grasses. If you have something like Johnson grass, crabgrass, Texas panicum, panic grass, cover crops, it's very hard to control those. Grasses are tough. Surprisingly, mare's tail is easy. I can get mare's tail. Pigweed is easy. I can get pigweed. Grasses, can't get grasses. Okay? And that's our big challenge with it. So, once again, so to talk about just that 10,000 foot view, several challenges exist. The biggest thing is the lack of knowledge. We still just don't know a whole lot of how to manage in those big, wide expanses of fields. Disbelief in success. I put that down here. Yeah, that probably needs to be up here. Coffee shops are the biggest displays of knowledge in production ag, okay? If your grower, if your neighbor didn't have real good success, the likelihood of you trying it is virtually non-existent, okay? It doesn't matter if he did it wrong, he did it. I'm not gonna do it, okay? Proven that it hasn't worked in the past. Once we get it wrong, they're gone. Never again, okay? So we have to make sure we're doing things right. Once again, that goes back to that overselling. Just be right with what you can expect. Can we do the set it and forget it and just leave and everything's going to be happy? No. That's a good way you get people not to do things. Okay? This is the big thing. And when we go from a small acre to a big acre, it gets more and more of an issue, is land ownership. About 60% of the growers we surveyed didn't own the land they were planting on. How am I going to tell you something's going to work in 5 years when you might not even be farming that piece of ground again? It becomes a bigger issue in tribal land because that's not an interaction between two landowners, that's a sealed bid. So if somebody comes and you are going to pay $20 extra an acre for the land that you farmed last year and somebody pays $21 extra, you ain't farming it. Okay? That's a big issue. And it's hard to get somebody to do things that work 2 and 3 years down the line when they don't know if they're going to be farming it. Okay? But there is potential. Economic potential is there. It's variable. It's very highly variable. Yield needs to be an added benefit. So increasing your bushel needs to be something you can get on the back end. Maintaining soil, most of our growers see that they can do it. They just don't know how to do it. Whenever you till to plant cover crops, what are you doing to that soil organic matter? You built it up and then you pushed it back up into the atmosphere. You didn't do anything. Just go no-till. That's going to store more carbon in your ground than having to till for cover crops. Okay? That's not how we do things. We have to build on our current status, and we have to look at our no-tillers. These are people that have struggled mightily with no-till in Oklahoma. They're the ones that are still doing cover crops. And so we have to build on the success that those folks did. Weed management, some degree of nutrient cycling. There is some caveats to that. And then soil health. Whenever we figure out how to define soil health, we can probably improve it. One person's definition of soil health is drastically different than somebody else's. So it's hard to improve soil health when it's a moving target. Okay? But once we figure out what that is, we'll do it. We just have to figure out how to define it first.